Hello and welcome, and thank you all for joining us for the second DevSecOn Australia meetup. We are a chapter of the global DevSecOn community, which is an inclusive community that educates and enables developers in application security. I'd like to begin by acknowledging and paying my respects to the traditional owners on the lands on which we meet today, with a special heartfelt and acknowledgement to the Waganga people, who are the traditional owners here in the town that I'm presenting from. And I'd also like to pay my acknowledgements and respects to Indigenous elders past, present, and emerging. So coming up tonight, or today, or whenever you're watching, if you're watching the recording, please join us on the Discord too. I'll share the link for that in a moment, although I did just put it into the chat, but I'll share it again shortly because there's some great conversations going on in there. And well, we'd love for you to join in as well. But coming up tonight, we'll be joined by Ben Dechrai, developer evangelist at Auth0, with a super interesting talk on building databaseless applications. Now, this topic really blows my mind. So yeah, definitely going to be a really interesting one tonight. And well, I really keen to see how that's done. And actually, we were talking earlier today, and we actually pretty certain that these are quite PCI compliant as well, way to approach e-commerce store designs. But anyway, keen for that as a chat topic in Discord. So again, join the Discord. We can talk about it more after the show, or if you're watching us on YouTube live, please pop any questions in there as well. So before we get too far in though, hello, my name is Developer Steve, for those that I haven't met yet. And so DevSecOn, if this is your first time joining, DevSecOn is brought to you by Sneak. And our aim is to create a vendor-neutral space to share best practices related to software security. Again, with the Discord, I keep going on about, see, now you all have to join the Discord because it's just such a fun, cool place to come visit. There has been some great conversations in there lately, so it is totally worth checking out. I'll pop the link in the chat shortly. So you can also request a talk there as well. If you've got a talk that you wanted to do or a particular topic you wanted to hear more on, that's a place where one of the places you can reach out. We are on social media as well, so at DevSecOn on Twitter, and more than welcome to reach out to us there as well if there was something you wanted to request, or even some feedback on how we can make it better, because this is a very community-driven, vendor-neutral space, and we're keen to, well, not only improve, but also just bring those interesting topics. So there we go. And of course, first-time speakers, if you have got a topic you wanted to cover, we're always keen to chat and keen to help. We've many of the chapter leads, we've got a lot of experience as speakers, so would love to help with any first-time speakers and new talks. So there we go. If you are watching this session after we've recorded it, so in the future, hello to the future, You can still ask questions on Discord or reach out to us on socials. If you have any questions, just drop them into the Australia channel on Australia channel on Discord as well. So you can connect more there as well. Before I hand over to the speaker today, I did just want to do a quick shout out for an event that we're running at Sneak at the moment called The Big Fix. If you haven't heard about it or seen it, it's been all over, well, socials, all over the place, heaps of different videos and whatnot about it, and a lot of people posting about it as well, including like the Docker communities, a lot of different coding groups and whatnot. So, but anyway, it is in its finals days, and so the Big Fix is aimed at helping keeping code projects and infrastructure vulnerability free. So this is actually really cool because, well, there's a lot of open source communities that have identified vulnerabilities in their code and then help patch them. And it's always important to not only keep those end users, well, their apps and experiences vulnerability free and free from all sorts of nasty things, but also, well, just keeping everyone safe and making sure that the code doesn't get anything nasty in it. So anyway, you can score a free t-shirt through this as well, which is really cool because you can help a community project and, well, get a free t-shirt. Who doesn't love free t-shirts? Anyway, I'll drop the link into the chat in a moment while Ben is getting set up. And that's about all I have for the opening. So without further ado, let's bring in Ben Dechrai. And he's waiting backstage.
Hello.
Hello.
Not anymore, I'm not.
Thank you. You're not. You're just front of stage now.
Can I just say how amazing your background looks?
What do you think?
I haven't actually. I don't know whether this was up before while we were backstage setting up. As I mentioned, I wasn't really focusing very much on the tiny thumbnail that I can see of you there. But when it was bigger just now, it's an amazing background. It's I'm pretty sure it's real, right?
Thank you. It totally is. I've gotten really good at carpentry.
Yeah, I thought so.
In the virtual times, built a bit of a desk and some backstage stuff. But no, this wasn't up. I flipped this around when we were just about to go live. No, it's so amazing that
you managed.
Always wanting to surprise surprise it all. No, it's so amazing to have you for the session, and yeah, thank you for what will be a super interesting talk. I always love hearing your amazing talks, and particularly, well,
no
one
pressure,
that
Ben.
no pressure.
What can go wrong?
No pressure. Yeah, wait, let me switch to my other scene then. Yeah, what can go wrong?
Absolutely. Can I have a coffee? I see that. It looks like it's still warm. Thanks for wearing the Auth0 t-shirt as well.
Heating it up. Oh, yeah. No, that's all right. It was it was next on the pile when I grabbed it this morning.
Fair enough. I'll have to thank the elves that I sent into your house to reorganize your t-shirts.
No, I am looking forward to this talk, and e-commerce science is something that I've built many of in my time, but one that doesn't need a database is totally mind blown. So super excited for this one. Let me bring your screen up, and hopefully, there we go.
Amazing. There we go. All right, I'm just going to make this a little smaller again. I made it a bit bigger so I can get the full effect of your background, but I'm going to make the screen a little smaller so I can see Discord in the background in case there are any questions coming through.
Yes, and actually, that's a good point. If I didn't say it enough already, everyone should join the Discord and put questions in there. But also, you can pop them into the YouTube chat too. We're keeping an eye on both.
Yeah.
So anyway,
and don't forget, everybody, join the Discord channel in case you
join the Discord.
Noticed that call to action right there. Join the Discord channel. We're hanging out in there live, taking your questions. Yeah, and I'm sure, to be honest, I forget about Discord. It sits in the background oftentimes, but I'm pretty sure if any questions come through, Steve, you'll jibe me virtually to get in there and answer some questions after the fact, right?
Totally will. I'll be monitoring as well. So, but yeah, good. Over to you, Ben.
All right, thanks, Steve. So thanks all for having me. I have a workshop that I've been giving called Write Your Own Web Store in Hours. and Steve asked whether or not I could give that more as a talk, which I've also done. It's usually like a 3-hour workshop, so I don't expect anybody to follow along. If you have done some digging, you'll probably find this online, and maybe you've already set up the prerequisites and you might choose to follow along. If you want to do that, absolutely fine, but be aware that I probably won't be pausing to allow people to catch up. So I'm going to treat this as basically doing like a live coding session and taking you through the process of building your own web store in hours. But before we get into the coding, I thought I'd just throw a couple of slides up to tell you a bit about me and why I believe I have any kind of authority to talk to you about this, and also what the concepts were, what I'm trying to achieve before we then jump into the code. So you've got an overarching view of the architecture that I'm trying to bring to reality, I guess. So who am I? I am the person who can't operate my laptop. I am also Ben Dechrai. I'm a developer advocate for Auth0. My background's actually in software engineering, and I started at PHP as a PHP developer back in 1999 or 2000 or something. And then I got into front-end development. So I've always enjoyed doing both the front end and the back end. But one of the things that I've always been passionate about is security and privacy. And if any of you have ever met me and had a chat with me, you'll know that I can drone on about security and privacy forever and a day. Just try and shut me up. It's almost impossible. But the fact that the passion that I have in those areas, and the fact that I have always enjoyed speaking at conferences and engaging with the community. I met somebody who worked as a developer advocate for Auth0, and he basically said that I should work for them. So I ignored him because I was quite happy in my job. But he kept bugging me, and in order to shut him up, I basically went for the job interview, and then I got the job. So here I am today, talking to you about security and privacy and all things related, civil liberties and anonymity and all those kind of things. I can just go on forever. I can also go on forever before even getting into the talk, so I should probably proceed. One thing though, if you do want to get in touch with me afterwards, like obviously we've mentioned, I shouldn't say obviously, I'm trying to reprogram myself. Not everything's obvious. We've already mentioned the Discord channel and asking questions in YouTube. Please hit us up in real time if you're watching right now. Otherwise, there is the Discord channel for after fact, but also my DMs on Twitter are always open, and you're always welcome to get in touch with me that way if you have any questions about this or anything else. Anyway, moving on. What are we building, or what am I building today? I've always liked the idea of trying to create what is often seen as perhaps not a hugely complex project, but something more than just a hello world app in a way that can be done in a workshop or a short amount of time, something that allows you to play with multiple different technologies. And I thought, is there a way that we can build a web application without having to deploy our own database? And there's a bit of hyperbole in the description of this session, in that it's a databases lab. There are going to be databases in certain areas, but we're not going to have to roll our own database. And that's the key here, is taking one big chunk out. So we're going to build a web store. We want a dynamic product catalog, so we don't want to have to rebuild the application every time a new product is added or like a description's change or any of those kind of things. We want to add user authentication in, so we know who is making a purchase, and they can come back in the future and perhaps look at their orders and those kind of things. And we want to check out and payment mechanism. There's no point in being able to sell things if we can't take somebody's money. So I wanted to put these 4 things all together. And I thought if I used Auth0 for user authentication, I used Stripe for all of the payment stuff, and then Netlify. I'm really liking Netlify at the moment. I use Netlify and Vercel kind of 50-50. For me, I really like these tools because the local developer tools are amazing. The reason why I chose Netlify for this one is that if you run the Netlify command line tools, I'm jumping ahead onto the next slide already. But I'm excited about this. If you run the Netlify command line tools, you actually get, you can run your cloud functions locally, which is really cool. And then using React to tie all of that together. But the thing that's missing there for pretty much 99% of applications, there are going to be some that don't need a database. But we're not rolling our own database. We're just going to use those 4 technologies, arguably 3 technologies and a framework, if React can be called the framework, but we're not going to be implementing a database at all. So the design theory behind how this is going to work is we have these 4 components that we're going to build around. And as I mentioned, the reason why I like Netlify is because we can run our cloud functions locally for development. And what's going to happen is our React app is going to talk directly to a cloud function in order to get products from Stripe. Stripe already has a way of storing products, and these products can have images and descriptions and prices and all of those kind of things. It's not just a payment mechanism. You can store more information in Stripe itself. So we can get products this way. We can also use our cloud functions for buying or purchasing product by sending information through to Stripe this way. And the reason why we need Netlify at this point is because some of these requests require us to use a secret in order to talk to Stripe. And obviously we don't want to put, and I'm using obviously intentionally there, hopefully it's obvious to most people we don't put things like secrets into JavaScript apps that run in the browser, because that's essentially public information now. So we're using Netlify cloud functions in order to make secure requests to Stripe to bring information back to React app. Meanwhile, React will then also allow you to log in by connecting through to Auth0. When a user uses Auth0 for the first time, we also want to make sure that that user is connected to a Stripe customer. And we're going to use the Stripe API in order to manifest that Stripe customer in the Stripe database, and then link that to the Auth0 user in the user database. So you see, we do have databases there, but we don't have to worry about the schema, and we don't have to worry about maintaining that database or even paying for an extra instance of something, because we can store the information between Auth0 and Stripe. We can store the information in there. Once the Stripe customer ID is created, or the Stripe customer is created, the ID is then returned, and we store that in Auth0 somehow, and we'll have a look at how Auth0 allows you to store extra information against users. And then that information, there's a screenshot of what it'll look like, so we'll be able to store the Stripe customer ID in this app metadata. And then that information gets sent back to our React app via the access token that we're going to then use to talk to the Netlify cloud functions. So that Stripe customer ID now exists in our React app by virtue of the fact that the user has now logged in. We can then send that access token as part of the buy request, which is where that information is required. And the buy request is then able to, where's my mouse gone, pass this Stripe customer ID through, which before our React app didn't have. So that kind of closes the loop then. Stripe is aware of which customer is making a purchase. The customer ID is stored against the user. When the user logs into React, the React app is then able to pass that information through to Stripe. So everything kind of knows everything about the users and the customers without us having, and the orders and the payments and those kind of things, the products, they're all stored in Stripe. We don't have to rely on our own database. So let's actually get started with the code. If you did want to follow along, again, as I say, I'm not going to slow down just because of the time that we have tonight to help out if you get stuck. But if you wanted to follow along, you're more than welcome to. And if you get stuck at some point, finish it off afterwards and get in touch with me via Discord or Twitter for supporting and to answer any questions you might have. So I will switch over to find the right window, this one here. So if you're following this along afterwards, basically just head to github.com/ben-dechrai/write your own web store in hours. And basically there's like a whole load of prerequisites that you need to do. Not a whole load, there's 4, arguably 3. I've tried to lay it out easily so that you can just follow these symbols to find out exactly what you're supposed to be doing at any one point. If you do this, I will do. So naughty. I'm such a child. You don't necessarily need to create a Netlify account. I found that just doing Netlify dev at the command line will allow you to bootstrap things up for local development testing. But if you then wanted to push through into Netlify and have it actually hosted, then obviously having the Netlify account is something you're going to need. Again, I use the word obviously, subconsciously, but hopefully that is also obvious. So you then need to fork the repository, and I'm using for the purposes of the workshops. And if you haven't tried Gitpod, it's basically a way of bootstrapping a Git repository into a VS Code instance in the cloud so that you can develop pretty much anywhere. And this is ideal so that you don't need to be installing NPM modules locally or anything like that. So you can just fork the application so that you've got it under your name there, and then you just prefix it with gitpod.io/hash, and it'll launch. It'll launch this live demos always go well. This VS Code in the cloud instance. Preparing a workspace. Meanwhile, also I've already created an Auth0 account for myself, and I have a Stripe account here, and we'll notice that There are no customers in there. We don't have any products in here yet. We've got no payments gone through. And so 2 blank-ish systems here. And putting container image, this is where I start waffling and stretching the conversation out. So what we're going to be doing, essentially, let's jump back into the code and we'll look at what the first step is to do. Can't use my mouse. Okay, we're going to create a new React project. So a lot of this is basically going to be copy and pasting, if you want to follow this through afterwards. But the idea is to get you to the point where you understand how these things operate together and get something up and running. So I'm going to use npx create React app, and hopefully we're up and running here. And do I want to be able to paste? Yes, please. We're going to create a new directory here called web store, and we're going to, now if you don't already, if you're not a React developer or you're not too familiar with JavaScript, it's not actually that critical that you're like that familiar with JavaScript or React. A lot of this, if you're familiar with any kind of C-based, C-style languages, then you're going to be fine following along. Even if you're not, you're still probably going to be fine following along with this. So we're going to create our new React web store, and then we're going to go into that directory and we're going to run Netlify dev. So that will then start a local development environment, which is actually now for us going to be hosted in the cloud, that will allow us to view what's going on with the ability to then also look at the cloud functions, as I mentioned. So if I open this in browser now, we should be able to see not found, hit refresh. Oh, that's port 8888. This is where, that's even better. Okay, technology demos for the win. I promise I did actually check this before we started. We're listening to the server on there. Let's click this one. That's also not found. I'll tell you why it's not found. Because I'm not actually in the right directory. I didn't go into web store. User error. All right, let's run this again. Netlify dev. Perfect. And then if I refresh this, go on. There we go. We now have a React app. Okay, cool. So this is, if you've ever, even if you've never used React, this is what happens when you create a new React app and you get this application. And then you can start editing the code. So let's get rid of these, don't need those anymore. So the next step we're going to do is to install some routing or routing, however you like to pronounce it, functionality, so that we can have a homepage as a component and then also a success page. So we're going to install React Router DOM. So we need to stop Netlify dev at this point so we can install those. And then meanwhile, we're also going to start creating some of the skeleton files in the background. So we want to create a new file called components layout. This is going to be a generic layout for all of our web pages. So I come into web store and I create a new file called source components layout. And we will be able to copy this. The way I'll do this throughout the presentation is I'll be copying and pasting, and then I'll explain what's actually going on. So we basically, all React components will basically pull in the React component. We're using link from React Router DOM, which allows us to link to applications within the React application. The reason we use link and not something like an href rather, is that because the single page app can reload the user interface inside itself without doing a full refresh, which is the whole point of a single page app in many instances. If we used a standard href like you have in HTML, it's going to tell the browser to change the location. Whereas if we use the link mechanism, that's what allows React to change the view and also change the URL, but it doesn't actually do a full refresh. So it's a much better experience for users. And this layout, which we're going to use on our home and our success pages, basically just installs the header or displays the header and a simple navigation construct at the moment, and then any children. So any children that are passed through here, which will be JSX elements that we'll see in the other components, will get passed straight through and displayed to the screen. So if I save that and we come back, we'll now want to create our main pages. So we've got our home page. So I'll copy this. We'll create web store sources pages home. over here, and we'll copy this. And this one's pretty straightforward, basically returning the header home and a paragraph of text. So these are going to be what are the children in the layout later on. And we're also going to create this success page. Or new file, source pages success. And we'll copy this, put that in, save. And this is where we then tie it all together. So there's already a file called source app.js, and this is default out of the box with React. And basically what we have here is that this is what gets returned to the main renderer at the top of when React is actually pulling all the information together to display. We want to replace all of this. At the moment, this is where we see the edit and save to reload. That's this page here, edit and save to reload. We've got our image and our link, and we've got our image here and our link. So we want to replace this entire homepage with our actual homepage, which is the homepage, home.js that we created there. So the way we do that is replace this all. And we're going to use the React Router DOM module that we pulled in earlier. And from this, we want to pull out browser router, routes, and route. And browser router is basically the top level element that we wrap everything in, and that then manages all the routes for us. This is where we're then pulling in layout. So this is the layout we generated up here with our header and our menu, and then all of the children that come through. So we're going to wrap everything in a layout. And inside here now we say for each of these routes, here's what we want to show depending on where people are going. If people go to /success, we want to show the success component. If people go to /, we want to show the home component. And that's these pulled in from over here. These are the other two pages we created already. So theoretically now, if I hit save and we restart Netlify, we should now have a home page. We need to wait for Netlify to boot up. It doesn't usually take too long. We'll have a home page, and then we'll be able to test that the success page is working as well. So here's our home page with our menu. It looks very ugly at the moment, but we will change that because nobody likes ugly. And there's a success page. Thanks for your order. So let's just go back to the home page here. Now, the making it pretty, if you wanted to follow along at home, we've basically got a couple of files or a whole load of files in the workshop assets directory in the GitHub repository that you have access to. So in here we have an app.css, and you basically copy that and replace the app.css in the source directory. So we'll do that quickly. Down under workshop assets, we have app.css. So I'll copy that, and under web store source app.css, and I'll save that. And magically, not magically, I'll hit refresh. There you go. Got something looking a little bit prettier. All right, we have our React app installed, and theoretically now we could do a Netlify push deploy. I can't remember what the name is. Netlify help for everything else. We can push that out and get that working in a production environment now if we want to. But we're going to define products in Stripe first. We have a store, but we don't have anything to sell. So one of the other things I've done to try and help out is if you want to grab some imagery to create your products from, under the workshop assets here, we've got Stripe product images. I'm just wondering, let me know if the text is big enough. I can make it larger, but I generally kind of keep it at the same size as I usually work at, because most people are probably going to be looking at their laptops. But if you want me to make it larger, just let me know. So there's 6 images in here. I generally go for the runners, which are the Revolt 164, and then the headphones. So you can actually from here download to your desktop if you want to, if you don't want to clone the entire repository to your laptop. I already have them obviously on my computer because that's where the repository was created. So I'm going to add some products here. I'm going to upload an image, which is going to come from projects. Where's projects? There's projects. Right here on web store, the workshop assets, images. I'm going to grab the runners, and I'm also going to cheat slightly and copy and paste because I hate typing really long things while also talking. It's something I'm very bad at. So I've got a description here. It's shoes red. There's only a right one. We don't sell. It's only the left shoe. We don't sell right shoes. Unfortunately, it's a niche product. So running shoe. I'm going to define some pricing down here. So most of the time, I don't charge recurring pricing for things that I ship out to people. So I'm going to choose a one-time price, and let's put this one down at $50. Let's save and add one more. Why didn't you remember where I was? Come on. If you're on Web Store, Assets, Stripe Images, and the headphones here. I'm going to copy this text. Oops, that's paste.
Hey Ben, I had a question, random question.
Yes, shoot.
And if anyone else has any questions, please drop it in the Discord, which you're totally going to join us on, or into the chat. But my question was, does this mean you're going to run the code because of the shoots?
Yes, developer Steve, I'm going to run the code, but I'm only going to run it left-footed.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, if you ran both, it'd be an A/B test, wouldn't it?
It would, yes. I don't have a clever comeback to that one. Sorry.
Very good. I'll fake the background.
Yes. Unlike my shoes, you are absolutely right. All right, so now let's go back to products here. We've got our two products here. The images are through. That's great. So now we need to find a way to get these into our React app. So we've created our products, and now we need to retrieve them from the Stripe API. We're going to create a lambda function in Netlify. So we need to install some extra modules in order to be able to talk to the Stripe API, which there are a whole lot of NPM modules for. I think I'm just repeating words in my head, so I'm just going to stop talking and start pasting. So NPM install Stripe. I'm also going to install Stripe.js. This is going to be required later on for the React app to talk to Stripe. The Stripe module itself is for Netlify Cloud Functions to talk to Stripe. And then I'm also installing .env here, and this allows us to put some secrets, some information into a .env file, which would, in a platform as a service like Netlify, would be defined as environment variables there. This allows us to put environment variables into a .env file so that we're not pushing these secrets into GitHub if we came to the point where we wanted to push this back in. So that's that part done. Now I want to create a function for getting products. And the way that Netlify works is anything you put in the Netlify directory, in the functions directory, becomes a Cloud Function endpoint. So it'll then be available at, I believe, we'll see in a second, whatever your URL is, /.netlify/products. So let's create this file here. Web Store, new file. It's going to Netlify functions products. And in here, we're going to copy and paste this massive amount of text, and then we'll go through what's going on here. So we're requiring the Stripe module that I just installed, and into there we're providing the secret key, which we're going to have to grab in a second, which we're pulling out from the environment variables. With this Stripe module now, when somebody calls this products endpoint, we're going to create we're going to make a request to list all of the prices. Now, Stripe is interesting in that you don't get a list of products and then get a price for it. Because each product can have multiple prices, because you might have a US dollars price and an Australian dollars price and these kind of things. You actually pull out a list of all prices, and each price has a product. So that's why this is fairly long, because we're going to rejig that slightly to make it easier for our React app to consume. So we're going to get a list of all the prices. I do like, however, that the Stripe API allows you to pass in an expand option, which basically says, as well as getting the prices, I want you to expand the results to also include, in this case, we're going to include the product information. So we're going to get a nested response now. All the prices, and each price will have a product inside it. Because we want to remesh this around, I'm going to create one new array called products, and then I'm going to go through all the data that just got returned through this call up here. I'm going to go through all the data, and I'm going to pull out each element, which I know already is a price element, because that's the list that we've got, a list of prices. For each of these prices, I'm going to pull the product out, and then I'm going to delete it. So I've now got two separate objects, the price that just got pulled in and the product that was inside it. We can then detect to see if the product is active. You can go into Stripe and deactivate a product. I don't want to display those if they're not active. So only if it's active, I then want to go through the list of products that I already have. This is the array that we're building up here. So if you go through this list of products, if you can find a product already with the same ID of the one we're currently looking at, that's just come from Stripe, then this is a essentially a duplicate. And the reason this might happen is, again, looking at the pricing, you might have an Australian dollar 50. Here are the running shoes. US dollars, I don't know, 40, 35. Here are the running shoes. So the running shoes will come through twice, but they're still one product, and we only want that in our array once. So if so, we push that into our list of products. Otherwise, we add it to the list of products with all the other information we have about the pricing. And then we just return all of the products that we just got from Stripe and a status 200. So theoretically now, if I save this and we restart Netlify dev, we should be able to come into our React app, and we go to /.netlify/products, and we wait for that to get loaded. We should now get, okay, let me check my notes to see what the actual request is. We need to get the Stripe key in as well, but we should have been able to /netlify, so you need to include the functions in there. So I'll do this just for completion. This is not going to work because we haven't actually configured the secret yet. There you go. You provide a secret. So let's jump over to our Stripe instance over here. We'll go to developers and we're going to grab our secret key. Now, if you like, you can take a screenshot of this and copy it because this is a test. So you're more than welcome to try and hack my Stripe account. Let's see, I want to come in here. So now under web store, I'm going to create a new file called .env. And I'll paste that in for now. We want the key to be name here. Oops. Control tab doesn't work when I've got a browser in a browser. All right, Stripe secret key. Let me just double check because sometimes you need to prefix. So yeah, these aren't being prefixed because we don't want them to be sent to the React app. If you're creating, and we'll discover this in the next part of this workshop, if you're setting environment variables that need to get through to the React app, you have to prefix it with React_app. And we'll see that in a second. So this Stripe secret key is going to be available to the Netlify functions, but it's not going to be available to React. So we're not leaking that information out into the public. Now we do need to restart Node, or in this case Netlify dev, in order to be able to read that .env file contents back in. And we should see, just gone off the screen there, injected .env file variable. I can't even select the right line. There we go. Stripe secret key. So we've got that available now. So if I refresh this now, we should get a JSON response. And if we look in here, we can see these headphones have been specially designed to work on most human heads, and my attempt at humor. So the information's coming through from Stripe now. That's cool. What next? We'll probably want to display it on the homepage. So let's show those bits of information on the homepage. We're going to open our source pages home file up again, which is probably still open up here somewhere, home.js. And we're basically going to replace the whole thing. There's some stuff in here that's not going to change, but easy to just replace the whole thing and talk through what's going on here. So we're still pulling in React component in order to generate this component as something that React can display. We're also pulling in useEffect and useState. I'm not going to go too much in depth into how these hooks work within React, but essentially what this is allowing us to do is to have a mechanism for remembering values and having a setter and a getter basically. And useEffect allows us to, in the way that we're using it, it's basically allowing us to make a to run some kind of code when variables that we have access to change. Now, in this case, so in the array here, this is where you put in your dependencies for this function that gets run. And if any of the values that get put into this dependency change, then it'll get run. So what this one here is doing is, because it's a setter, setters don't change, but it'll also get run the first time the component gets loaded. So essentially what we're saying here with this useEffect is, in an asynchronous manner, once the homepage component is in place, we want to run this code so that the homepage can then be updated with information that we require. And then if you switch views and you switch back again, then it's not necessarily going to reload it. Only if you unload the component and reload it, or if you do a hard refresh of the browser, will this get run again. What we're going to do is make a request to that Netlify endpoint that we just created, and that's going to return to us the JSON that we just saw in the other tab, which we're then going to put straight into the set products or into the products variable up here. And then what we're going to do is put some code into the output. So this bit here that looks like HTML is actually JSX. It's a way of putting JavaScript and HTML together in a way for a lot of the single page apps nowadays. And we're basically saying if products is truthy, so by default up here, we've set it to undefined. So that would be false. As soon as product is truthy, so it'll be, in our case, an array of information that came back from JSON. We're going to go through and map each of the products inside it. For each of those products, we're going to output the product name, we're going to output an image, the product ID, the description, and we're going to calculate a price. The price comes through in cents, so we're going to divide that by 1,000, so it's fixed to 2 decimal places. Finally, we're going to, for each one of them, print a button, but for now, this button doesn't actually do anything. So if I save this and make sure React is still running, which it is, and we refresh in the help. If we go back to the home page, we will now see there the images did come through. We now see the 2 products that came through. So we're relying completely now on the database in Stripe. We don't have our own representation of these products. If I went in and made a change to the product in Stripe, it would reflect in here immediately. Now, some of you might be looking at this point and thinking it's not really good for performance. Caching might be a really good idea. And yes, there are reasons why, as you go forward, you might want to implement a database. But this is really useful for getting things up and running really quickly. This is technically production capable. And as Steve mentioned, because we're using Stripe, and because we're storing user information in Auth0, and because those two are eventually going to communicate with each other securely, I haven't gotten a lawyer to look at this, but I would say that this is probably going to be PCI compliant. So it's a low-risk way of getting your application up and running early, and then you can always refine as the project grows, or as the user base grows, or the product catalog grows. All of these things can affect your application, and then you can make choices whether or not you want to pull things out and cache them somewhere. Maybe you have memcache, maybe you have your own database, whatever. There's lots of options to you then. All right, moving on. So we've done this, we've got our web store showing. Let's now switch over to authenticating users. We can't really allow somebody to buy something unless we know who they are yet. So we're going to switch over to the user side of things. We're going to create an application in the Auth0 dashboard. So what this means, if you haven't used Auth0 before, we have a list over here of applications and APIs. We're not actually creating an application. I think that's possibly obvious. What we're doing is we're creating a definition of an application. And our application, or in OpenID Connect parlance, we are a client to the OpenID Connect provider, or the identity provider. Our application is a client. Auth0 is the provider. We need to define within Auth0 bits of information about our client in order for Auth0 to be able to communicate with it securely. So we're going to create an application over here. I'm going to call this my web store. And we're going to create a single page app because React is a single page app platform. You can also create native apps like desktop and mobile, regular web applications that have a backend, and there's a mechanism here for machine to machine, which doesn't really have users involved, but is a way of securing services so that they know that they have authorization to make certain requests. But we're doing a single page app, so I'll select single page app. And I'm not going to look at the quick starts, which if you're using any of these others, there are quick starts to help you get through. I'm going to jump straight through to the settings. And this is where I'm going to pull the information out that's going to allow us to implement Auth0 in our application. The steps I'm about to take are outlined in the quick start as well. If you're following along, or if you're using Auth0 for your own projects, I would recommend following the quick start through for your particular platform. But essentially what we need to do is to, I must be doing that a little bit later on. Yeah, we'll install the modules later on. We need to install the modules within our React app so that they can, the SDKs will basically do the communications with Auth0 and the redirects and all of those things, and managing the tokens that come back, all of that gets taken care of in the SDK. We also need to configure Auth0 to understand more about our application. And we do this by defining a callback URL, a logout URL, and a web origin, which is basically going to be the URL of our application. So I'm going to copy this one, because that's my application. I'll scroll down to application URIs. I'm going to paste this in here, and here, and here. Essentially what this part is doing is when the login process, I'm not going to go in depth into how like the login flows work, ask me questions about it if you're interested. But essentially, your users get redirected to the login page. They log into Auth0, and then there's a callback to your application that includes some kind of code to allow the login flow to continue. That callback, you have to specify where that's allowed to go, and this is where that callback request can go. If the callback goes to a URL that's not specified here, then Auth0 is not going to send that code through because it's not been approved to receive that code. It's a security mechanism to make sure that third parties can't try and do an in-the-middle attack of some sort and obtain that code. The logout URL, similarly, when you make a request to Auth0 to log a user out, will only redirect back to a URL or a domain that you've approved. And then web origin is around automatic logging in again. So because we're using a single page app, if somebody did right-click open a new tab or they hit refresh, then all of what's in the single page app in memory is lost. So the user's tokens and identity is no longer known. There's a way of doing what's commonly referred to as a transparent re-authentication. There are various different ways that's done, but in essence, it requires a request to be made to Auth0 in a way that the user doesn't realize. A response will then come back saying, yes, we know who this person is, or no, we don't. And the web origin of where that request comes from is defined down here. So you can't re-authenticate somebody into a different URL. So long story short, we're basically putting these in here to make sure Auth0 will only ever send information to your application. Right, let's just save changes and continue with that. So now we're going to come across and we'll grab this part here, and we're going to install Auth0 React. So we've got generic SDKs as well, but for some of the more popular platforms, we have specific SDKs, and the React one creates, and if you're familiar with React, you'll be aware of providers, and we basically provide a provider and a whole lot of hooks that you can use in React to make it really easy to integrate Auth0 with that. So I'm just going to restart. Actually, there's no point in restarting Netlify dev because we're going to put some more environment variables in. So we've done that. Now we're going to jump into the index page, the main source index page, which we haven't looked at yet. That's this one here. And this is like the very top level. You know how we edited the app before, where we put in the route stuff? Now we have, I think it just closed itself. Keep open. Now we have the top level here. So this is where the React DOM gets rendered, and we put the app inside here. So what we want to do is we want to pull in the Auth0 provider from Auth0 React, which is the module we've just installed. And then under here, I'm just going to copy this and paste it a little. In here, this app was already in there, and essentially what we've done is we've it's easy for me to say, we've wrapped the app component in the Auth0 provider. And this allows us to allow every component inside the application to have context around the Auth0 configuration, like the domain and the client ID, which we'll look at in a second, which means that we don't need to be passing information down. React allows you to pass things through, chain them through into subcomponents, which can be quite messy and hard to maintain and understand exactly where the data is going. This allows us to use the Auth0 hooks to get information at any point that we needed inside the application. And for that, we need to define the domain and the client ID. So in fact, I won't put it into the environment variables for the purposes of the demo, but that would obviously be best put into environment variables. But just because I'm aware of time as well, I want to keep going. And if we have time at the end, then I can just go through and clean this up. But we're going to define the domain. So this is the domain for your tenant that you've created in Auth0. And basically every time a user logs in or changes password or re-authenticates or any of these kind of things, this is the URL that they get sent to. You'll see that a generic or a random development URL was created when I created my account. You can pick your own, it's fine. And the secret, the client ID, this can actually go, because this is going to the browser, the whole React app. The client ID is publicly shareable. There's no harm in sharing it. So if I did actually commit this to my Git repository, I'm not creating a security risk in doing that. It's just good practice to put into environment variables, because then you can have a different client ID for staging and development and production and those kind of things. So if I save this, and now I guess let's just double check I haven't missed anything. I can start Netlify dev now because we didn't do the environment variable settings. So we've now wrapped our application in the Auth0 provider, but we need to create a login mechanism, like actually what do users do to log in, and a logout mechanism. So what I'm going to do is change the homepage, the buy buttons on the homepage to be a login button if the user is not logged in. So I'm going to copy this and we'll paste it in, and then I'll just talk through what's going on. Then let's come to the top. Where do I need to paste this, just so I don't break anything? Put it in there. So I've just added these in. We're now pulling. We pulled the provider. We pulled the provider out of the Auth0 React module before. Now we're pulling out use Auth0. Use Auth0 is a hook that allows us to get more information from Auth0, and we're going to use it in here in this buy now button component that we're not sharing beyond here. It's just used a little further on in this page, and we're pulling out of it a couple of Boolean values that we can test against. Is loading basically means that the module is still connecting to Auth0 and working out whether the user's logged in or not. So there's this kind of bootstrapping phase at the beginning of any first page load. And while there's uncertainty, we can say, look, we're still loading, therefore we don't know what to show yet. So if we're still loading, we're going to return an empty component. Once we know that they're loading, if the user's already authenticated, we're going to return that buy now button. Otherwise, we're going to return a button saying login to purchase. And if somebody clicks on that, we're going to call this login with redirect function, which will redirect them to the Auth0 tenant for them to be able to log in. So now we just need to implement this buy now button, or actually use it somewhere. And in order to do that, we're going to go to the bottom here where this buy now button is. And let's actually select all 3 lines. Apparently, Control-Shift-I does work for automatic formatting, but it's reformatted everything. But it's still readable. That's good. So basically, I've replaced that button that we had before that didn't do anything with a call to this component. And we're passing into that component the product we're rendering. So now for every product on the homepage, we're going to render this buy now button component, which is going to automatically update depending on whether the user is logged in or not. If I hit save, and we come back over here, and refresh. Hopefully, I'm not made a fool of. Log into purchase. That's cool. The only other thing that I want to do before we actually test this is create a logout button, because once we're logged in, we need to be able to log out for testing various aspects of this. So we're going to come into our layouts here. I'm just going to copy this. We're going to replace the whole thing, but I'll show you what's changed. So at the moment, we've got the header, we've got a menu item to home, and we've got the rendering of all the children. That's the actual content for the page we're looking at. And what we're doing is we've still got the home link, but we're now adding in a logout button. Because of the magic of the CSS that I created and implemented before, they're actually going to look the same, this link and this button. But we're going to say if we know, once we're not loading anymore, once we know the state of whether or not the user's logged in, if the user is logged in, then show the logout button. And if they click on the logout button, call the logout function, which we're pulling in here from the use Auth0 hook. So now I save this. This is not going to change because I'm not logged in. Let's log into purchase and cross our fingers that everything's working. So if I actually click, we'll see we're redirected up here to this dev.ysmyg1-z URL. That's the domain for my Auth0 tenant. Now, I don't have an account yet, so I'm going to have to sign up. This is a brand new tenant, so there aren't any users in there. And once that's done, I'm going to get redirected back to my demo URL. That's the callback URL that was called. And for a split second, there would have also been some extra information in here, like a auth code and a state and a few other things. And that's what's then used by the SDK in order to make another request to Auth0 and pull the tokens back. And we'll have a look at those a little bit later when the tokens are a bit more interesting. But you can now see that the buy now button is showing, and we've got a logout button here. So we've managed to log in, and we have some information about the user. So the next step is to connect Auth0 to Stripe so that when a user creates an account, they also get a Stripe customer ID so that then when they purchase, Stripe knows who's making that purchase. So I'm going to read this bit verbatim because this is really the crux of how I managed to get Auth0 and Stripe to work together in order for us to not need a separate database. Because typically what you would do is have a user login, and then from that you get some kind of identifier back in your identity token. And we'll have a look at the identity token, so you can see what that would be. Essentially, it's SUB, or a subject is one of the claims in the token. And then you would have your own database where you would manifest a user in that database, and that user would then have a pointer to the Stripe customer ID. You might also have the products in that database, but we don't want that. We just want Auth0 and Stripe to work between themselves to manage all of this information together. So the adding Auth0 to React App is straightforward and nothing overly complex has happened in Stripe. Normally, you would probably create a database, but we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to get Auth0 to talk directly to Stripe in order to make sure that every user has a customer ID, and then we'll return that ID to the application via the access token. This is from Auth0 to the React app in order for that to be used by the lambda function. So that's, if you remember back to the first few slides that I showed, that's the access token being passed through for Stripe to be able to use it. So we're going to use Auth0 actions. If you have used Auth0 before, you might be familiar with hooks and rules. They were two different areas of Auth0 where you could run your own JavaScript at certain points during the authentication process, or various other events that happen within Auth0. We've combined that into one called actions with a better user interface and more usable environment. And we're going to create some actions in order to be able to run our own JavaScript. They basically get run as cloud functions as well, but on Auth0 services to make that connection to Stripe. So let's go to Auth0, and on the left here under actions, we'll see flows and library. These are currently the 6 flows that you can hook your own code into. I believe there might be some more coming at some point in the future, but these are the ones that have been available for quite a while through rules and hooks as well, and the most commonly used and functionally useful. The main thing we're going to be looking at is the login hook. Now, you might argue that maybe you should do it pre or even post user registration. Probably not pre, actually. But if a user registers, then manifest a Stripe customer ID and link that in. I'm actually going to do it on login, though. And the reason why I'm choosing to do that in this particular case is because I've already created an account. So if we look over here under user management, the test that I just did 3 minutes ago to test the integration, we can see that I now have a user account over here. Now, next time I log in, I'm not going to have a post-user registration event because I've already registered. So we're going to need to make sure that it runs every time somebody logs in. If you're doing this kind of thing, and you are definitely going to start with a blank, empty database of users, then by all means go for post-user registration. I'm going to put in a check to make sure that it only happens once per user myself, rather than relying on every user being fresh to the system, if that makes sense. And what we're going to do is, once the Stripe user ID is created, and you saw this in the screenshot before, is we're going to add this into the app metadata area. And these two areas here, I keep pointing to my screen, but I realize you can't see my hands. These two areas here are essentially JSON storage where you can put whatever you want, really. There are probably, I don't even know what the maximum lengths are. There's probably a maximum length to it, but I've never hit it yet. The thing to remember is that the naming confused me a little to start with. I thought app metadata was data about the app, and user metadata was data about the user. It's actually metadata that the user can modify. So if I logged into an application and I monitored the network tab, I would be able to get my ID token, my access token out, and we'll see that in a second. If I then crafted a request to the Auth0 tenant and I used my access token, I would be able to, as a user of this system, modify this data. This is useful for things like, do I want dark mode or light mode? Or do I want to show things in Australian or US dollars? These are user preferences that are okay for users to change. But I don't want people changing the Stripe customer ID. So we're going to store that under app metadata because that's metadata that only the app can change. Right. That being said, let's go back into, we're going to jump into the library area because we need to create a couple of cloud functions first, or actions as they're called in Auth0. So we're going to create one action. Let's find out what we're going to call it, because I like to copy and paste. Link user to Stripe. And we're going to, again, here are the triggers that you could call. We're going to leave it on login/post login. So after the user logs in, you can also go back and run things on node 12 if you want, but I would recommend going node 16 unless there's a particular reason you have to go node 12. It used to be node, I think, 8, and then node 12 recommended. So we generally keep a previous long-term version. So try not to use the previous because at some point that'll then get deprecated. And in here, you can see we've got this one function that gets called after the user gets logged in. And into it, we get passed two variables, event and API. Event basically tells us information that we can consume and use. This will contain the user information of who's just logged in, for example, whereas API allows us to effect change. So we can update the user metadata, or we can do a redirect, or various other things. On the left-hand side here, we've got a testing area. I'm not going to use that today, but it allows you to make changes to what gets submitted and actually test your functionality before it goes into production. And by production, I mean it gets executed by Auth0 when a user logs in. We can also store secrets in here, which is great because I don't want to be putting my Stripe secret into the code. And you can also install modules. The rules and hooks allowed you to install modules as well, but there was a more limited subset of all the NPM modules, whereas here you can run pretty much any NPM module. You can install pretty much any NPM module that you want, as long as, and there were two conditions, that it doesn't have any static bindings and something else, but there's like a really small subset of NPM modules that you can't use by virtue of the fact that you can't have static bindings. And also I think it's something to do with requiring something. I can look that information up for you if that's valid or pertinent, but it's in our documentation as well. So I want to install the Stripe module. And now I have that available to me on the right-hand side here. I'll just close this so we've got a bit more view space of what's going on over here. And we'll do a copy and paste so that I don't have to type and talk. And what's going over here? So we're requiring the Stripe secret key, which we'll define in a second. Then what we're going to do is look through event. That's this part that gets sent up here. We can say for the user, have a look at the app metadata. And if the app metadata already contains a Stripe customer ID, do nothing, because this is obviously run once before. We don't need to do it again. It's just going to confuse things if we have multiple Stripe customer IDs for one Auth0 user. If we get to line 8 here, then obviously we don't have a Stripe customer ID yet. So we're going to use the Stripe module that we just imported, the NPM module, and we're going to call customers.create. And in here, we're going to provide a couple of mandatory values. I think email is the only mandatory value. We're also going to add in description, just so that we can see that come through. And I want to add metadata into the Stripe customer ID as well. They have a similar metadata concept. And in there, I'm going to create a Auth0 User Id key with a value of the user ID of the user who just logged in to Auth0. So now we've got a two-way relationship. Soon we'll have a two-way relationship. This customer object that gets returned is going to have an ID attribute. And that ID is what don't modify that. That ID is what we're then going to store in our app metadata for the user who's just logged in. And this is now where we've got our two-way connection. So in the Auth0 user, we've got the Stripe customer ID. And in the Stripe user, we've got the metadata of the Auth0 user ID, and they point to each other. So just before we do any more, let's add this secret. Let's copy this. Add a secret called Stripe secret key. I'll come back over here and I'll copy this again. All right. So now we can save as draft, which is great, but that's not going to help us. You can also go straight to deploy, which is going to make it available for execution, but at this point, it's not going to be run yet when the user logs in. It's been successfully deployed, which now means that we can add it into one of our flows. So we jump back to Auth0, the actions flows on the left-hand side here, and we choose the login flow. This is where you can insert a whole lot of components, and there's a marketplace as well where you can add other components. So this is where this becomes more useful rather than just when you're using your own custom actions. But under the custom actions here, we can see the link user to Stripe that we just created, and we can drop that in. Now, the advantage with this is that once you start adding more, you can choose which order they get run in, but I only want to run that once, so I'll leave that in there. And if I click apply, then now this is the point at which that code is going to get run whenever somebody logs in to Auth0. So theoretically, let's jump over here now and we'll log out. Log in. Theoretically now, and I'll just double check to make sure I did reset everything. I think we saw this before, but we don't have any customers in Stripe yet. So now when I log in again, Hopefully the user doesn't notice anything different. That's great, we're logged in. If I jump over to customers now and I refresh, we should see a customer appear over here. Wonderful. I'm so glad that worked. You can see the email has come through, automatically generated by Auth0. We've got our Auth0 User Id down here, which is the one ending in F321. And if we jump back to Auth0 User Management, we can see here that this user has an ID ending in F321. And also we can see the customer ID starts with an L, ends with a KFT. And if we scroll down here, we've got the Stripe customer ID, starts with an L, ends in KFT. So we've got that two-way link now. Now the next thing we need to do is make sure that our React application has access to this information. By default, we don't shove everything that's in app metadata and user metadata into any of the tokens. There's tokens you want to keep as compact as possible because they effectively become the header of many of your requests, and we don't want to make those super huge. So we're only going to, you need to manually define any changes to those tokens so that you've got control over how big they get and they don't get bloated. And also if they go over a certain size, then suddenly your headers get truncated and you then have invalid tokens. So let's now add this into the access token, which is going to get returned. And in order to do this, we're going to create another action. You could put this into the same action. I'm going to create another action just because I like to show ordering actions in the flow screen, but there's no reason why you couldn't put this into the same action that we've just created, because they're both going to run after login. If you want to have one action run in one after one event or one trigger and other code run at a different trigger, you're going to have to create two actions for that. But I'm going to create a second action just for demo purposes. And we will call this one add Stripe customer ID to access token. I like verbosity. And in here, we're going to, this one's really simple. It's much shorter. To run that post login. And essentially, all we're going to do is say if the user has a Stripe customer ID already in the metadata, then I want you to modify the access token, or I want you to do something to the access token. I want you to set a custom claim. And we'll have a look at a token in a second so we can see what claims are if you're not familiar with JSON Web Tokens. The claim value is going to be that Stripe customer ID. And the key of this key value pair is going to be Stripe customer ID, but convention states that any custom claims should be prefixed with the URL. And further convention is usually that the URL will be the URL of the application that's going to consume this claim. So we're going to use this URL here. Replace that. Oh, not all the way. Just to there. So the Stripe customer ID intended for this application, consumption by this application, is now going to be equal to the Stripe customer ID in the app metadata for the user. Let's deploy that. Now we'll come into flows. Once that's done, log in. We'll go to our custom, and we're going to do that after linking the user to Stripe. Obviously, we don't want to do beforehand because the user might not have a Stripe customer ID yet. And now when I apply this, that information is going to get sent through in the access token. So let's log out and just have a look at what's coming through the access token so that we can get a better idea of what they are. And then hopefully it'll make a bit more sense as well of what's happening when we pass them on to the API. So I've just logged out. We'll go to network, make this a bit bigger. Let's not do that view. All right, I think we're good there. I'm going to filter by Auth0. Okay, let's just go. So again, talking and typing, not my forte. We are going to do a redirect. There was, I don't know whether you spotted it, there was this request to the token that came through. And basically what happened then is our React app made a request to Auth0 with the information that came through in that header. It's a post request, which allows it to, allows Auth0 to be more certain that the information is going back to the right place as opposed to being a response to a GET request, which is a query string, which is going to be interceptable and possibly data injectable. Post responses are a more secure way of getting that information back. And the information that's come back is this access token here and the ID token. So let's have a quick look at the ID token. And jwt.io is a great tool for looking into JSON Web Tokens. And if we look in here, loading, and there's a bit of information cropped at the top and the end that I can get rid of. All right, so this is the information that's come through from Auth0 to the single page app, to the React app, as the information about the identity of the person who just logged in. And you can see the email address, that's also under email. Because I created an account with an email address and a password, all Auth0 knows about me is my email address. So it's also reused that for name. Nickname is the part before the @ Because I have a Gravatar profile photo, it's pulled that out as well. You can see the issuer, which is the Auth0 tenant. The subject here, this is, again, the F321 that we had before. This is the Auth0 User Id. Even if I change my email address or my password or whatever else, this is always going to be the same. So if you are ever relying in any of your applications on knowing who the user is, this is the unique identifier. If you did have your own database, this is what you would store in there in place of a username and password, or a hashed password. When the token was issued, expired, a few other bits. You might have noticed, though, that the access token itself doesn't look like a JSON Web Token. This is what we call an opaque token, and is useful for making a request to Auth0 for extra user information, but it's not a JSON Web Token yet. And the reason for that is that Auth0 will only generate a JSON Web Token if the token also needs to be used by other applications. Because if it's just going to be used by Auth0, an opaque for token is fine. We don't need extra information in there. An access token that's a JSON Web Token is useful because you can get extra claims in there, as we're trying to do. So we need to do one more thing before that token becomes a JSON Web Token, and that's to define the API. We need to say this token is going to be used for communicating with this API endpoint, which we're going to be creating soon. So I'm going to come into the Applications API section. We were in Applications before. I know the name is a bit funny. Applications APIs, we're going to create a new API here. And I'm going to use the URL of the application we're using as the identifier. So identifiers are generally URLs. They don't have to be, but convention says that they should be URLs. They should also be the URL of the actual endpoint they're going to be hitting, but they don't have to be. It's a bit confusing. Basically, it's just a string that gets compared to make sure that a token is being consumed by the endpoint that it was intended for. And it just makes it easier for everyone all around if they are URLs, because then you know exactly, you can look at the audience and you know exactly, and we'll see what the audience stack looks like in a second, and you can see exactly what that token is destined for. If I create an identifier here called my web store backend, like, well, is that production or staging or which web store, or is that somebody else's my web store backend? It gets a bit confusing. So my web store API. So that's pretty much all we need to do. We do need to then do some implementation to actually consume that within our Netlify API endpoint, but we'll look at that in a second. If you were also doing some of the kind of like native apps or front-end, back-end apps, you might also need to come in and define which of your applications over here are able to talk to this API. But because this is a single page apps and native applications, sorry, I've said native tonight. If you're doing a regular web app, you would need to configure that in here. Single page and native apps don't require any more configuration. All we've done is configure this API, and that should, from memory, be enough. So now we should be able to log out. But we need to, before we log in again, tell our React app that we want to log into Auth0 for the purposes of then talking to our Netlify API. So let's jump back into the code over here and into index. Now I'm just going to quickly scroll through the instructions to make sure I haven't missed anything. I don't believe I have. So yeah, that's the next part, in fact. So I'm just going to copy this, and we look at the index page. So instead of those, not that far. So here already. So what I'm doing now is I've basically added this audience in. I probably could have typed that rather than copying and pasting. I've also seemed to have double pasted a whole lot of other stuff. Okay, let's do that. So we're basically defining the audience for the access tokens. We're saying we want somebody to log in, and the tokens we get, the intended audience for those tokens is this endpoint here, which actually needs to be our URL. These the X's and the zeros and the foobar change each time you launch a new Gitpod instance. So I'm going to, I think I need to leave. So remember how I said that it's just a string that gets compared? Because over here I defined it with a slash at the end, I need to make sure that here it has a slash at the end as well. So now if I save this, and we log out and log back in again, we should now notice that the token that came through here before, oh, that's gone. The token that was an opaque token should now appear to be a JSON Web Token. And then we can have a look at what's inside that JSON Web Token. Wrong password. Here we go. Right, cross fingers. Oh, want the pre-flight, this one here. Why didn't that work? Probably because, let me restart Netlify dev. Double check that everything here looks good. Ah, the login didn't actually work. Login again. Okay. Okay. So here we go. We've now got the access token. If I copy, come on, copy that, and we inspect this one, this is now also a JSON Web Token. Craft. Right. So now we can see this is what would normally be sent through by Auth0. We've got the issuer, which is the Auth0 tenant that we logged into. Subject again, the user F321, that's my user ID. The audience, by default, you will always get this one here. So this is the tenant that you logged into, /userinfo. That's a common endpoint for getting more information about a user. Because we added this second audience in here, our API, that's why it's now become a JSON Web Token. We can see when it was issued, when it expires. But the arguably more interesting part, if I can get it to scroll properly, is this one here, where we have our Stripe customer ID. And this one beginning L, ending in KFT, was our Stripe customer ID. So this customer ID now was created in Stripe, passed back into Auth0, stored into the app metadata, and now has been returned to React in the access token, which we can now pass into our Netlify function, which can then be sent to Stripe, making a full circle. Stripe knows who's making a purchase. Let's do that. Starting a Stripe web checkout. So the quick start here for the APIs that we looked at before, if you're doing in Node.js, there is an express JWT and a JWKS RSA function module, rather, that you can install so that Node.js running Express type apps can consume and use these JSON Web Tokens and validate them and all those kind of things. They're not Auth0 dependent. The Auth0 React is for integrating React with Auth0. This is for checking JSON Web Tokens. So any valid JSON Web Token will work because the JSON Web Token itself defines who the issuer is. Therefore, it doesn't have to be Auth0. It could be any OpenID Connect compliant identity provider. The thing is, though, that these don't work for Netlify. Netlify have a different mechanism, which is to use this serverless JWT /Netlify module. So I'm going to install that. While that's going in the background, we're going to create a new endpoint called buy. That's going to be where we send requests to make the purchase. So under web store, new file, Netlify functions buy. And the code that we're going to put in does this. So we've got our Stripe secret key defined in the environment variable already. Don't need to do that again. We're going to require that Stripe module so we can talk to Stripe. At the same time, we're going to pull in this Netlify JWT verifier. This allows you to verify JSON Web Tokens. We're going to call that and pass into it the Auth0 issuer and the Auth0 audience, which we need to define in our environment variables file. And the response of that is going to be a function that will be able to verify a JSON Web Token. And then rather than just doing export handler equals function blah, we're going to wrap the whole thing into verify JSON Web Token. And this is going to grab the JSON Web Token out of the header, verify it, pull information out, and make that information available to us through this context. And the context will include an identity context, which is the identity token, and an access context, I believe. Is it an access context, or am I making things up? I'm making things up because what's actually happening, of course, there is no identity token. It's the bearer token. So the way that I'm confusing myself a moment. The way that the token gets sent through is as a header in the HTTP request, and because it's of a type bearer token, you'll have, if you're familiar with headers in requests, and we'll see it happening in a second, you have a authorization key, and the value is bearer space followed by some kind of token, and that's being passed through, and that is what is then passed through here as the identity context. It's the authorization header. And in there, we know already, because we've seen it, the claim exists for this Stripe customer ID. Now we do need to change this value here. So I'm going to make sure that I copy, this is where the information is going to be stored. So I'm going to make sure that's where I'm trying to pull it out. In there. In fact, let's just copy this part, because the other thing we want to do is update the success URL. So if the user is logged in successfully, we want to redirect them back to success on our domain. And if they click on cancel, and we'll see these buttons come through in the Stripe user interface, then we want to send them just back to the home page. So we're putting this information out. The Stripe customer ID is now available to our cloud function. And we're going to grab the body. The body contains, and we'll see that in a second because we'll code that, the body contains the information on what is being purchased. And then we make a request to check out session create. And into it, we pass, the important parts that we pass anyway are the customer, which is the Stripe customer ID, and the line items, which is the item that we want to purchase. And what Stripe does at this point is this request is actually going to return a JSON payload that includes a URL to redirect the user to. So essentially what this is doing is saying to Stripe, hey, this person here wants to buy this product, give us a URL to redirect them to so that they can make payment. So we want to then return that entire session information, which is what we're pulling out here. We want to return that back to our React app so our React app can do the redirection. So let's code in the React app part of it. This part here. So into our homepage, we have this login to purchase. No, not this one. We have, there we go, buy, this function here. So let's just check to see what I've copied. All of that. We will therefore replace buy. Make sure I don't move too much. So this buy now button here, when you click it, calls the buy function, which is this function here. We're also pulling in is loading, is authenticated, and login with redirect. We actually want to pull in a little bit more than that. We also want to pull in get access token silently. This is a mechanism for getting the access token without the user being aware that the access token is being retrieved. Now there's nothing nefarious about it. It just means that if there is no access token available, we're not going to force the user to log in. It's basically saying try to get the access token. If it fails, that's fine. So when the buy button is pressed, we now get the access token silently. Assuming that all works, we get an access token out. And the access token is passed through as the authorization header as a bearer token, as I mentioned before. So we're making a request to functions buy. We're passing that through as the bearer token. We're passing in the price ID, the product that we want to buy. And as mentioned before, in buy, that's this part here, the payload that gets passed through. So we've now connected React to our cloud function, and we're passing the information through required for the cloud function to tell Stripe who this order is being created for. So let me just double check that I saved. When I save this one. And when that response then comes back, that's the where to redirect them to. We're basically going to say grab the JSON and then window.location.assign, basically redirect them to the URL that gets returned to us from Stripe. So that's now going to send them to the payment page. The only other thing we still need to do is in the environment variables file, we did need to define those two things that by is dependent on, and that was these two values here. So let's just paste those in. And the issuer is, go back to applications, my web store. The issuer is going to be the domain. And the audience is going to be this one here. There we go. And that's the value that we had. In fact, let me show you exactly where that is defined again. That's the value that we had for API audience for my web store, which is the identifier that we created. All right, so now we should be at a point where this is all tied together. Let me just restart. We've stopped anyway. Let me start Netlify dev so that these values get called through, and obviously so we can actually run our application. And if we wait for a second for the development server to start, we shouldn't need to do a logout or log in again. We've got our access token here. So theoretically, I should now just be able to click. And let me, I don't want to clear. Where's persist? Preserve log, and we'll show all so that we can see what's going on. So I'm going to buy myself a pair of running shoes, which hopefully, cross fingers, is going to work. Do I even click? Helps if you click. You know what? I do need to refresh because we made a change to what the button actually does, and the application needs to know that. So I don't need to log out and log back in, but I do need to refresh the app for the new functionality to come through. Now if I click on, oh, I need to log into purchase because I've been logged out. There we go. So now if I click on the buy now button, we should see, and let's just clear this to make it easier to find it, a request to buy, which is failing. Issuer has to be a valid URI. Oh, yes, okay, my bad. So in environment, this actually needs to be a URI. It's the name. And I think, I should follow my own notes. Make sure you have a trailing slash for issuer. Yes. It's to follow your own instructions. The lesson I would never learn. All right, let's refresh again. All right, so now if I clear and click buy now, hopefully we don't get a 5. We do still get a 500. Issuer has to be valid. Yeah, it also helps if you restart the application to read the new environment variables in. I'm learning a whole load here tonight. I hope you're having fun too. All right, let me do another refresh, just to make sure everything is in place. I'm going to log in. If you're wondering why when I click login, it doesn't actually prompt me to log in, it's because I'm still logged into the Auth0 tenant. It's just because I'm in development here. It's forgotten the login. The redirect to login, basically Auth0 says this person's already logged in, issues the tokens right back. So that's why the login form isn't appearing. Right, clear. Let's make a purchase. We're not getting an excellent, we got a 200. That's what I'd like to see. So if we have a look at the headers here, we'll be able to see the authorization header that came through. Let me just make this a bit bigger, because I'm pretty sure that'll be easier for you to see if I do that. You can see the authorization header came through with bearer, and here's our access token. So that's the information being passed into our Netlify function. And you can see that the response, if I make it smaller again so I can actually find, oh, there's so many in here. Let me filter by, oh, that's not working. Anyway, there was a response that would have given us the URL here, and you can see we've gone to checkout.stripe.com/pay/ and then this really long, not so random, specific string, but unique to this situation. And because the initial request that then resulted in a response of this redirect destination to go to, because that included what we wanted to buy and who it was for, we can see here that it's pulled out the running shoe, and it's pulled out my email address already, because it knows in the Stripe database for the customers that this is the email address for the user who's currently logged in via Auth0. So if I now enter my credit card details, please don't copy these, they're top secret. And click pay. Should now redirect back to the success page. Success. Thanks for your order. And if we look over in Stripe customers here, the payments, we should have a payment that just came through, 1929, which is just now for me. And if we look in here, we'll be able to see this was for the running shoes. So we've come to the end of the main part of the workshop, I believe. I don't think there's much else, testing the site here. The things that still are outstanding here, as I mentioned, this is completely PCI compliant because we're 100% reliant on Stripe for all of the payments and the product management. We're 100% reliant on Auth0 for the user management. Our application can't actually modify anything nefariously. It's all connected through Auth0 actions, talking directly to Stripe. Obviously, there are some things you'd want to do here. You want the user to be able to view their existing orders. If we had more time, we'd be able to use Stripe's portal. So there's a similar to the checkout where you say, tell me where to redirect the user to make a payment. There's another function they have, tell me where to redirect the user to see all of their orders. So that's something that they host for you. Or you can also make requests directly to the API to pull out previous orders and display them in your own application. The other thing we haven't done here is there are some places where exceptions might occur, where we're not really handling those very well. But by and large, 97.3%, finger in the air. We've got a working web store using no database beyond just storing stuff inside Auth0 and Stripe. And I could do a Netlify push and get this into production right now if I wanted, or Netlify deploy, whichever way it goes. So I hope that's been interesting and useful. I'm happy to take any questions. We pretty much 90 minutes on the dot. So that's, I'm quite impressed. I hope it wasn't too fast. But like I say, my DMs are open, so let me know if there's anything you want to know about what I've gone through or any other aspects of this. Thanks.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, that was really cool. I didn't see any questions, but if anyone has any, drop them into the Discord because still watching that and also watching the comments come through. For some reason, I keep thinking, I wonder if you could use this for NFTs, and I guess you could, but I don't know why. Have you used this?
You could sell it. You could use it for anything that you could sell online, I guess, as long as, or very specifically about this architecture, as long as Stripe allows you to put it into the catalog, then you can sell it. Yeah.
Then the other thing, I know we were talking about this earlier today, but yeah, you can like you're saying, like you said, Stripe and Auth0 are both PCI compliant. So in theory, it's PCI. Well, it would at least go through the checklist pretty well as well. So, but yeah, I mean, literally for demo and
we're not lawyers, and we can't make a statement along those lines, which is why we say theoretically. But I would imagine you're right that the complexity of getting this into a position where if you need PCI compliance, the checklist would probably be quite easy to get completed in this situation. Certainly much easier than if you were storing stuff yourself in. I mean, even if you did pull half of this out, if you stored products and like orders and those kind of things, it's probably not going to be a huge risk there. But certainly you're eliminating a lot of risk by doing it this way.
I mean, if you had to go to that level of compliance, then I mean, scale is probably more of a concern anyway. But like you said, we're not legal, nor are we PCI compliant checklist people. I've dealt with those in the past. They're very thorough. So just being easy.
Yes, they certainly are.
No, that was amazing. Thank you. And yeah, thanks for sharing that with us today. Let me just take. Oh, also special mention to. I always love seeing you do live debugging, and I've seen this a number of times now. I have many stories on this. And today was no exception. So, and I'm glad it ended up working there. Always that moment.
I'm so glad it worked as well. Yes, it's always frustrating. On only one or two occasions, I think I've got to a point where it's just like, you know what, I'm dead in the water here. There's no way where I can go. But I do enjoy, and we've spoken about this before, I do enjoy live demos going wrong, because I think all too often nowadays we can see highly curated demos and it looks like everything goes smoothly. And when I was like an up-and-coming developer watching people doing demos, if it worked so flawlessly, then I would think to myself, well, they obviously know what they're doing. And like, I will be the first to admit that I have no idea what I'm doing half the time. Most developers, even whether you've been to university or not, most developers are still self-taught in terms of learning new stuff all the time. And it's experimentation and getting things wrong. That's how we learn. And I think if we have things curated and working too perfectly, it actually dissuades people from learning. So I'm glad things went wrong.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I've learned so much from breaking my own stuff through the years, and then working out what I did, pulling it apart, putting it back together again.
Totally.
Yeah.
If it works first time, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, that's right. Then you wonder what's wrong, and if it's on a Friday, there's definitely something wrong coming.
Yes.
No, thank you very much for that. It was great spending time with you. I know you're already in the Discord, which we may have mentioned once or twice during the session, but
yeah, everyone, you should go join the Discord.
You should totally join the Discord.
Totally.
I put it into the chat again, but it's also on the DevSecCon website as well. So amazing. Thank you again for coming on tonight and sharing that with us. Anyone will hit you up on there, or App and Dechrai on Twitter, or pretty much any socials, right?
There we go. Trying to work out how to point to my own name on screen. This one here. Most of the socials, I'm one of those people that doesn't actually check LinkedIn that often, less so than I should. Twitter DMs are definitely the fastest way of getting my attention. Yeah.
Nice. Amazing. Thank you. And so let me just wrap up a few things. Just in closing, thank you all for attending the session. If you're watching in the past, if you're watching in the future, hello from the past, please feel free to join us and connect to the community. Always looking for talks. So if you have got a talk you want to share or that you want to see, please do reach out and say hi. Happy to help you put the talk together. Our next meetup will be probably towards the end of March, just working out the logistics on that. We do have a speaker lined up, so if you are keen to talk, then please reach out and we'd get something set up for May, April. Wow, the year's nearly half over. I literally just realized that. But yeah, thanks for joining us tonight or today or whenever you're watching or wherever you're watching in the world. Hope you're all safe and well, and we'll see you next time.